Hi everyone and welcome to the Publishing Performance Show. Today I'm joined by Martyn Ellington and Stiefel, who are co-writers and they write books together, plus they have written books on their own as well. So welcome to the show, Martyn and Stephen.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having us.
So this is interesting. This is the first time I've done a show with multiple guests, but also the first time I've ever interviewed anyone that has co-written a book. So could you just tell me a bit how that works?
Well, me and Steve live in different continents. So Steve's in the US and I'm in North Yorkshire in England, which is a posh way of saying Teesside. And we got introduced in 2016 by my then literary agent. And Steve worked as an editor on my first published book back then.
Yeah.
And we got together to rewrite a book that I'd self-published about 5 years previous. So process was pretty straightforward, actually. Steve would write a chapter or whatever it is. We'd constantly talk over Skype. This was before Zoom became a thing, back in the old days.
Yeah.
And of course, he would email over his ideas and what he'd written and this kind of thing. And, I'd make notes, send it back to Steve, and then we'd discuss it. So it was a fairly painless. Luckily, we both had sort of very close ideas on the format of the book and what happens in the book. So we didn't have too many sort of disagreements. Steve always likes to say that it's whoever wants it more wins the point, which I think he's right on. So Steve's won some and I've won some, but I think overall it worked really well. It was pretty painless. Time consuming because of time differences and this kind of thing, but other commitments, because Steve has another writing partner and he's got his own projects, and the same for me. I've got another writing partner and my solo projects as well. But yeah, it was actually a very enjoyable process. Yeah, it was good. I enjoyed it and we're doing it again.
You are.
One thing that happens in that process is that when we send the file, we essentially send the master to the other. So the other writer becomes the possessor of the main document. And so when I'll do all my edits, and I might even add questions for Martyn to answer in the document, but now he owns that document. He'll go ahead and take that, polish it up to his satisfaction, send it back to me. I never look at my previous notes or questions or anything like that. I just now once it's back in my possession, I just take ownership of it. And essentially, we don't use track changes. It's just written into the file, but I started accepting the changes by not changing them. And then if I have additional questions, I'll put them in and send them back to Martyn until neither of us have questions and so that's the thing. If Martyn has a point that I don't like and I'm changing it, he'll change it back. And eventually one of us will just stop because we want to stop sending it back and forth.
So you don't go book a room together, for example, and work at the same time in the same Zoom call or anything like that. So it's very much one of you takes charge and then you pass it over.
We have, as Steve said, when Steve was over here for 6 months, we found a coffee shop that we quite liked. And we'd often go there and sit face to face and talk about projects, and one in particular that we're working on currently. We've got a meeting with the production company next week about the TV adaptation of it.
Oh, wow.
So, and that's a novel that will be out probably just after the new year, we think. It's titled The Harvesting.
And so you're, at the moment you're writing that book, but you're already speaking to TV companies about potentially making it.
Yeah, we've done it completely the wrong way around. So we've written the TV show and the pitch deck and the 2 pages, and we've pitched it to producers, and one of them suggested, quite a well-known producer suggested that we do a podcast for it, which we've written half of, and half of it's up. And then we thought, gosh, actually it was Steve that suggested it and said, you know what, it would actually be a good idea to write this as a novel as well. Why not? Why not take on the extra workload that we can't afford to do? So I wrote a first draft of, I don't know, Steve, what was it, 80,000 words or something? And then
a little bit shorter than that. It was 60, 65. We're 65. Heading towards 80 now.
Yeah. And then
how long do you expect the final draft to be?
Probably 85-ish.
Yeah, so
80,
about normal.
85.
Yeah.
And it's going to be a trilogy, so we think for sci-fi, horror, it's about the right length. You don't really
Yeah.
want them much longer than that.
Yeah. And when you're writing together, how did you find the difference between being in the same room and being able to, bounce ideas off each other compared to doing it over Zoom or sharing a document?
Well, when we were together, we don't drill down real hard. We mostly talk. We don't really write. I mean, we talk about other things as well, but we talk mostly. It's mostly planning, I guess, but it's sometimes very granular. Planning this paragraph or that paragraph. Then one of us will say, "Oh, I'll fix that later."
Yeah.
So we don't. I mean, it's the writing process, but it's not the writing per se. It doesn't usually go fully into the draft unless we're very far along in finalizing something, in which case we might do a final polish, usually of shorter documents like the 2-pagers or whatever.
Yeah.
But another reason why we are writing this novel is because in pitching and dealing with producers in Hollywood, the value of IPs become abundantly clear to us. And
what do you mean by that?
Everybody wants their new project to be based on an existing IP of some sort,
right.
Whether it's a podcast or a novel or a memoir or something else. It's just for whatever reason very attractive to people with money. Okay. I guess it's sort of a proven entity. Then they kind of have a better sense of it, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the IP itself has to have had a huge financial success. But it's still, for whatever reason, very appealing. And so we decided to do it not only for that reason, but because a novel is something we can sell to individuals instead of having to look for that one person who can put together a multi-million-dollar plan.
Yeah.
And so the selling of a book becomes almost the advertising for the script that we wrote a long time ago.
Yeah. I guess I have seen that in other ways where you've had a film maybe that's become famous, then a book has come afterwards, which is the story. But I think it's more unusual to do it that way around. It feels like usually there's a book and then that's what forms the plot for the TV show.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But it's been an interesting exercise to take a script and then adapt that script into a podcast and into a novel. So yeah. It's been a very interesting exercise to do. I feel I've learned quite a bit from it. I don't know what Steve's experience was from that point of view, but yeah,
one thing we've seen is that the story isn't the same in each. It's actually diverging in all 3 cases slightly differently. Different things happen. We're trying to have things like character deaths be the same from one to the other, but there are small plot points that, certain characters appear earlier in the novel than they do in the TV series and things like that.
Hmm. So your editor's going to have a fun time having to look at the script and also at the book at the same time.
Well, hopefully they only need to have the sense of one for the other.
Yeah.
That if you're looking at the script works in its own way. And of course, you look at any movie, it's going to change a book as well, especially cutting things out.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that we're able to we have more story in the sense of what's going on between the characters and more scenes, but the story we're telling is pretty similar in shape and size in the novel as it is in the scripts.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the pacing's pretty similar as well, which is interesting. And there is a big difference between writing a script and a novel, So in the script, it's John enters the room, but in the novel, you can actually write his sense of the room and his thoughts and how he feels, and you can really drill down deeply into the characters. So I prefer novel writing because of that. But it was enjoyable to write the script for it as well, and it's it's placed well. It's won a few awards. The script,
great.
It's done pretty well. We had it at Sky TV at one point. It got as far as a development meeting, but they felt that the project that they had, John Wyndham's project, the Midwich Cuckoos, they felt that whilst they're not similar projects in any way, they're slightly overlapped.
Right.
And Steve managed to get it into Hulu at one point, and they were considering it. So, it is
similar response too. We have we like this a lot, but we have something in the space.
Yeah.
Let's we'll come on to that sort of proposal for the production companies as one of my later questions. But I just wanted to chat a bit more about working together. So when you're working together, how do you resolve creative differences that you have? If one of you's got an idea and the other one, do you have a way of dealing with that fallout?
Yeah.
Stephen's right.
We use beta readers.
Yeah.
And if everybody's saying the same thing, whoever that supports, or if they aren't, if they don't have any problem, if I'm raising an issue, and we do deal with some cultural differences.
Yeah.
And Martyn's pretty gracious about kind of bowing to I would call it American market as opposed to the American way.
Yeah.
Understanding that there's a bigger readership for the books, for the projects we're doing now. It would work the other way if we were talking, in which we will be doing, to a British production company. We would want it to be more British.
Yep.
But there are small things. A lot of times it's dialogue where an American just isn't going to understand.
Right.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
In the novel of The Harvesting, there's a comment from one of before the event, the inciting event happens. So we're getting to know the characters, and three of them are work buddies, and one of them sort of says to the other, "God, he eats like a JCB."
Right.
And I had to explain in detail to Steve, and he had to then explain in detail to the reading group in Los Angeles what a JCB. And I just assumed that JCB was a worldwide product. I just assumed that everybody knew what it was. But in America, it's cat. It's a cat over here, and so things like that. Now JCBs ended up staying in, but there's other things where they've just said, "Look, it's too British. The American readers are not going to understand the reference. They're not going to get it." Some of the banter between them we've dialed down quite a bit because British people are. The more they take the am I allowed to swear? The more they take the piss out of each other, the more friendly and the more we think of each other.
Yes.
But of course, in America, that isn't the case. So a lot of the banters had to be dialed down in the book. But as Steve rightly said, in a British TV show with a British production, we'd be able to dial it back up a bit.
That's really interesting. I've never even thought. I have thought about cultural differences before, but usually it's been a bit more surface level. I've never really thought about specific examples such as JCB. I mean, it's so famous in the UK that we've even got a song about it that was in the charts once. So
it was, yeah.
Well, also, if you get all the way to production, regardless of which way, the other culture is much more forgiving of a final product than they are at the decision point of should we make this or is it too British?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting.
Once it's, we watched Baby Reindeer, which was huge in America at the same time that it was huge in Britain.
Right.
And there's a lot of things in that show that are a little hard for the American audience to follow at the sentence level.
Right.
But in the broader picture, it's very easy to understand.
Yeah. It's
a universal story in a certain way.
Some of the accents may be a bit difficult to understand, but
yeah. But it translated very well for whatever reason.
Yeah, no, that was really good. Now, one of the reasons I wanted to ask that question was because on Martyn, on your website, you've got this quote, which I thought was quite interesting. You put, "He describes his writing technique as unusual. Whilst most writers plan their plot lines and twists and make extensive notes, Martyn states that once he has characters figured out and the basic storyline planned, he prefers to let the story develop organically, and he has no real preconceptions on how the story will end or what fate the characters will have in store." And I was like, okay, that is firstly, that's really interesting to hear how writers write like that. But how does that fit in with working together? Because that must be quite difficult to deal with, that sort of style.
No, I think we found a way around it. Steve's very structured and I'm not. So Steve's able to. I'll just go off and say, "Oh, wouldn't it be great if this happened?" And Steve's like, "Well, no, that's even for science fiction. That's absurd. Don't be so stupid."
Yeah.
So we're very sort of good. I'll come up with sort of really out there ideas, and we'll adapt them, and we'll bring them in to make it fit within the story. But yeah, the way that I look at writing in my own novels, such as, Devolution of a Species, which is a climate fiction book that I wrote, I had the characters, I had the basics of the story, but, this is a worldwide ending event. Why not just let it develop as it would naturally? Give it some legs and just let it run. And of course, you've got to check back and you've got to, you rewrite things and you figure things out ahead of time. But when I started writing that book, it turned into a story that wasn't the story that I set out to write because of that. And I found that absolutely fascinating because suddenly I was doing research on carbon dioxide and, how the planet breathes and how we breathe and the Gaia hypothesis and all of these fantastic, weird and wonderful things. That's now been disproven, but it ended up being the undercurrent for the book. But I didn't start off with the Gaia hypothesis. It wasn't until probably I was a quarter of the way through the book that I was doing research for something else that I stumbled upon it, and I thought, "Oh, that's so cool!
Yeah.
That's now going to be what this story is about."
Yeah, that's really interesting.
But from my perspective, Martyn's a purposeful experimenter. I've dealt mostly with as an editor, with not a co-writer, with people who aren't and who will go off on tangents that you're like, this doesn't belong in the novel. But I think Martyn values his time enough not to do that. So he doesn't write himself off into little side rooms that have nothing to do with the main thrust of the story.
Yeah.
And so there isn't, I don't feel like he's working too far away from a structured writer who outlines. And to be fair, I don't sit down and figure out a book from start to finish before I start drafting. I work back and forth. I like to know what's going to happen for the next, let's say, 30 pages or the next 5 times I sit down to write.
Yeah.
And I like to keep ahead of myself and not wander off into those little dead ends myself. And I usually have a pretty good sense of the ending. We did struggle with the ending on this one. But we think we found it, and we haven't written it fully. We've got it in the rough draft, but not in a polished sense. And I've pitched the ending to my beta readers, and they liked it. So we feel like we don't know that we hope we can land the plane, but at least we know where the runway is.
How do you find those beta readers?
They're excellent.
No, I meant literally,
how did I find them?
Yeah, how did you find them? Not like how do you find their quality?
They're writers I've known for a very long time.
Yeah.
I have a writing group. Just through the process, some of the ones I know not as well, I've found through the pandemic on Twitter. Martyn and I are part of a pretty extensive writing network. We're not super active in that, but if I put out a tweet saying, anybody want to read a novel, I can somebody will come back and say yes.
Right. Okay.
And it might be an exchange. I'll read your novel if you'll read this.
Yeah. What's the name of the network?
And we have other readers. We have writer readers, as Steve said, who understand the construction and the process and things. But we also have a couple of readers who are just readers that just buy books, so kind of the target audience people that we give. Yeah. For the harvesting, we've already given them what was essentially the first draft. Come back with any notes, does it make sense? And one of them came back with some really interesting points, which I won't go into because I don't want to spoil it. But yeah, she came back with some really interesting points, which almost sort of repointed some of the plot points to it.
Yeah.
So they're really helpful as well, because that's your target audience. It's all right, if you're building a car, it's all right. The technicians and the designers saying it's great, but you need the public to want to drive it as well.
Yeah, that is really interesting. I mean, a lot of people listening to this are maybe writing their first book, or they haven't got such a good professional network as you've got. What advice would you give to them for them to find that network and that beta group of readers that can help them in the same way that you've had help?
Facebook. If you look on the communities pages and just look for local authors, local writers, people that are sort of maybe a bit further down the train track than they are.
So like local writing groups to your area,
yeah,
I mean? Right.
Yeah, they're very, very useful. As Steve said, Twitter or X or whatever it's called, we still refer to it as Twitter. I think everybody does. Again, very easy to join the community. We're all really supportive of each other. We're not in competition with each other. If someone wins something or gets something, it's fantastic news for all of us. It shows that, it's still possible. So, yeah, there's a lot of it about, your local library. They'll have connections to local authors and groups. They might even have meetings there. Things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. If you're really having trouble, you can maybe go to the groups and, ask for some, say that you'd be willing to pay a certain amount of money for editing or notes.
Right.
You have to be careful with that, because you can get you can get great stuff. You can get an amazing response from somebody for a small amount of money. You can also have somebody charge you a fortune for nothing very helpful.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
The one of your books that you've written together is called Tomorrow's Flight, and I love the premise of it, talking about these archaeologists that find like another archaeologist who's been buried from a previous age amongst like the bones of a dinosaur. Could you tell? I mean, it's such an interesting concept. It's kind of taking that time travel in a different way. Tell us a bit about that book, what inspired it, and how you dealt with writing it together.
I'd had a story in my head for years, so I'm much older than you, so you won't remember that on a Saturday morning on Tyne T's ITV, there used to be a show called Lynn's Looking, and it played opposite Swap Shop, which you won't remember either. But it always finished the Saturday morning off with some kind of Harry Houseman monster effects, the Seventh Voyage of Sinbad or Valley of Gowanji or something like that. And I consumed that stuff as a kid growing up, and still do to this day. And so I just had this story in my head for years about these scientists, these paleontologists that are digging up a dinosaur and they come across a fossilized human. Fossilization takes millions of years. So there couldn't be fossilized human remains at this point. Mm-hmm. And then they discover parts of an aeroplane, and they call in the National Transportation Safety Board, because of course it's set in America, because why wouldn't it be? And, they discover that this plane hasn't actually taken off yet, because with time travel, of course, you can do what you want. You can pretty much make the rules up as you go. But there's a B story, or a double A side, let's call it, if it was a single from the 70s. And that's about a group of passengers that board a plane for a routine red eye, and they hit some unusual turbulence and are flung into the past, into the Cretaceous period. And so the story runs parallel with each other, is that we've got these paleontologists and crash investigators piecing together what's happened, but we've also got the people on board the plane trying to survive. And it sort of climaxes and comes together at the end of the book with a very, what we think is open, in case we got offered millions of pounds to write the sequel, but yet still very satisfying ending in case we don't. And I suddenly found myself in 2008 with some time on my hands. There was a huge personal and professional change for me. And so I wrote it and I self-published it. And it did pretty well. It became an Amazon genre bestseller with very little marketing, because I'm still not a marketing person. We'll come on to that in a second. So I got a bit encouraged, and very, very, very long story short, I sold an old car that I had, which was a Peugeot 607. Now remember that because it comes back in a second. And I hired one of Stephen King's former editors, a guy called Mike Garrett, who edited it. And as Steve was saying, you've got to be careful. So I vetted him and blah blah. And I think it was about £1,800 to edit the book. So I got his notes back and I rewrote it. And I was able to find a literary agent in New York with it. And that's how I met Steve. She introduced me to Steve. And then after he'd done my first book, which I mentioned earlier on, which became the Martialis Incident, and that was my first traditionally published book, we then got to work on what was called Yesterday's Flight. And Stephen pitched the idea of, rather than just editing it again and making it further ready for the marketplace, let's just rewrite the whole thing. He saw a lot of potential in it. And he was right, because I was never fully satisfied. It was the first book I'd written, and it was the first fiction thing I'd written since leaving school, Stainsbury Modern Comprehensive. And so we did. And that's the book that we wrote starting in 2016, and we launched it in 2021. It came out.
Right. And how's the sales gone for that book so far? Has it been good since the rewrite and the change?
They've been good as far as we can take them. And what I mean by that is that we shopped it around traditionally to literary agents and publishers, but we could never really get a deal that we were happy with. And so we'd already started this little production company of ours, and we thought, well, why don't we just have a publishing imprint as well and publish it ourselves?
So what do you mean by imprint?
So it's kind of part of the production company. So it publishes through the name Mess, which is our two initials put together. So we published it, and you can get it through Gardners or Ingram. So it is a published book. It's not a self-published title, and we've done quite well. It's been an Amazon #1 international bestseller twice, and it's also had over a million pages read in the Kindle lending library. But our expertise, or lack thereof, of marketing and the funds that we have available have really taken it as far as we can. So really, to elevate it to what we believe its full potential is, we're now looking for investors to come on board with Mess and help us take this book and The Harvesting, when it comes out, much, much, much further, and also produce a short that Steve's written as well. So there's a lot of things going on with different productions at the moment, but that's the next stage, really, is getting investors involved and interested in us. Yeah,
right.
And for your listeners, a couple things that I think have been helpful for the book, where Martyn found a terrific image for the cover, and it's pretty high concept. I'm sure you'd agree with that.
Yeah.
And I think that the cover is really evocative. And my background's in publishing, so I was able to bring in professional designers relatively inexpensively to do the covers and the layout of the book, which actually that's one thing about self-publishing that's a little unknown, is that the inside of self-published books are not designed, but other books are designed. And so Tomorrow's Flight is a designed book on the interior. And it's been pretty heavily copy edited as well through my writer friends and beta readers. There are a couple of mistakes we're aware of, but pretty much in sync with what you'd find in any traditionally published book. But as far as sales go, we think that the cover and the premise are a big part of it, but we had a lot of success through the Kindle lending library.
Yeah.
And we took advantage of that as much as possible. And we ran specials where we did giveaways which would just boost our sales tremendously.
Yeah.
And we believe that that's because, and this is a helpful tip, I think, is that when you're a member of the lending library, every book download is essentially free to you. because you've already paid for it. So when you see a free download, it's irrelevant to you. It's just advertising, and so you download it. Well, we get paid for that Kindle Lending Library download, where we don't for the one that we're offering.
Yes.
But it's the same to the consumer. And so we would see a huge amount of increase in income over those, we run them 3 days maybe?
Yeah, just over a weekend.
And we'd get, we had thousands. I mean, not like multiple thousands, but 3,000, 4,000, 2,000 over that period.
Just people borrowing
the first one that we did, which took it straight to number one in about 4 countries, we got about 9,000 downloads.
9,000? Okay, wow.
In total, I was looking at the sales figures for Flight, and in total we've had, I think it's just under 27,000 downloads when we've run promotions with it. So, yeah.
That's amazing.
And then you see this, as Steve said, you see this huge bump then in the lending library. It follows on.
It's going to be super helpful if you ever do release a sequel as well, because you've got those 27,000 downloads. Now, the people who've got those Kindles, your sequel is going to be promoted to those people, like on the Kindle homepage and things like that. So it's a really good platform for you building the second book.
There was a key sentence in there. All you have to do is write a sequel.
Just write a sequel.
Just write another book.
It's just yeah. I mean, it's funny you should say that, actually, because we did embed Easter eggs in the first book in case we wrote a second book.
Yeah, nice.
So anybody that's read tomorrow's Flight, look out for, or is planning on now reading tomorrow's Flight, and please do, because it's available from all good bookstores. It's a really good book.
From all good lending libraries.
Yeah, you will. If you're reading it carefully enough, you will see Easter eggs that will work with the second book if we ever get round to writing it.
Yeah, amazing. So what's your plans for that book? You've got your Mess imprint. Are you planning on using that company to take it to TV production or anything like that?
That's the plan, Teddy, as I said. But the thing really now is what we need now as investors. We need none of what we're trying to do is cheap. And neither Steve or I are rich. So we have a lot of plans. We have some good ideas. We have things that we know that work. Mm-hmm. We have a few marketing ideas that we're not sure of. But yeah, it's what our focus now is. We've got a couple of focuses, and I'll lay them out very, very quickly. Steve's written a short based on the exhumation of Edgar Allan Poe, and I'll let Steve tell you about that, which by the way is super spooky and fantastic, and I love stuff like that. Yeah, we've got this novel coming on. We've just signed our first client author, who's a local lad. So I'm currently working on his book, doing the first round of close edits, and then it'll go to Steve, and he'll do a closer round of edits before we get it ready for publishing. And obviously we're getting finished off with our first book in the trilogy for The Harvesting. Mm-hmm. But really, to push us forward now, we're at the sort of the investment stage. But and that would also include producing this short movie. We've got a producer and a director and all those things lined up. We just, it's the same with everybody now. You've just got to find the money to do it.
Yeah. Just before we go on to the harvesting, I was just thinking about investors. So, what techniques have you used to try and get any? Have you thought about Kickstarter or anything like that?
Yeah, we've spoke about that. It's something that we are looking at. It's very competitive, and we've got to figure out which is going to be the best way to approach it. Much more than that, we haven't done yet, because we're just rolling into the end of the year now, and we've got some things directly in front of us now that need to be moved out the way and finished. So. At the moment, we haven't really done a lot to look for investors or attract investors, but it is firmly up there on the to-do list.
Have a think about Kickstarter. I spoke to.
It's just something in the new year that we'll be placing as a high priority.
I spoke to Kevin J. Anderson, he's the author of the June books, and he's had some really good success with Kickstarter. And for him, it's all about providing extra value to the customers who are investing in the business. So I think you've got lots of avenues there where you could create short stories or something like that around the topics you want to get investment in. So yeah,
we Exhumation was a finalist in a short script competition, and one of the awards was a detailed meeting about using a funding service, and it was really an impressive description. And I know some of the writers on Twitter who've done it, and one thing I would say is that it is a job to take that on. So you can't just say it's my birthday and I'd love to get $20. You have to really sit together and put together a plan, and you have to work. You once you launch any sort of funding, that becomes your job for the window that you set up. And they had all sorts of advice on what to do and what not to do in that meeting. I still have the notes. I don't quite recall all the details on that, but everything they said made sense. And essentially what they were telling you is do a lot of work, and make it purposeful according to their guidelines.
Yeah, for sure.
So, I think it's intuitive for some people, but it is a lot of work.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, maybe you need a different approach to getting those investors. Now, with the new book, so The Harvesting. So, tell me a bit about that book, and firstly, tell me what the book's about and the storyline and how you wrote it. But then also, let's go on to your plans for getting it onto TV, because I know you've got some quite exciting plans for that book.
Yeah, The Harvesting is a short book that I wrote in 2011. And I wanted to write an alien invasion, not novella, short story. But and again, as a kid, Earth versus the flying saucers and all of these things, I just consumed them and still do. But the problem I've always had is that Independence Day is a spectacular film, and it's Emmerich at his absolute best. I think we all agree that it's up there. And the problem I've always had is I've never ever been convinced that if aliens came down to take over us, they would invade us traditionally with military. Now, with everything that's been said in Congress and at the Pentagon lately, I might be proved wrong in a few weeks. But I've always thought that if they've got the technology to fly across, the vastness of space, they wouldn't be relying on laser beams and things to beat us. So I came up with the idea of, when we want to examine a tiger or a rhino, we put it to sleep. Why fight it? Why wrestle it to the ground when you can just put it to sleep?
Yeah.
So I came up with the idea that that's what the aliens would do, and they deliver this sleep thing, whatever it might be, through this red rain that saturates the earth, and everything that's living goes to sleep. So the basic premise is it's set in the north of England, between England and Scotland. And we've got three guys coming home from we've got three guys coming home from work. They work on the oil rigs. So they're driving home from Aberdeen to the main character lives in Hutton Rugby. And this red rain starts, and they fall asleep, and the car crashes, and they wake up to this world that's now seemingly devoid of human life. So of course we've got the traditional tropes of he's got to get back to his family. So we've got Rick from The Walking Dead now, and of course they come across other survivors or whatever you want to call them. But we've also introduced a new horror threat, which are called the rejects. So the rejects are people and animals that have directly consumed the red rain, either through drinking it or through a wound or whatever, and it sort of turns them into a 28-day sort of rage virus thing. So they're not zombies, they're living people. They haven't come back from the dead, but they can be rescued. It's an infection which can be, that can be taken from, but they'll remember what they did while they were in the reject state. So two of the main female characters, one becomes a reject, and she tries to kill the other one that isn't. And later in the series, she gets rescued and she gets treated for it, and of course she's no longer the reject, but she still remembers trying to kill this other character, and of course the other character. So we've built a lot of layers into this story. One of the biggest ones is that all the women suddenly become pregnant, and we've got this strange boy that keeps appearing to different members of the group, if you like, but at different ages and things like that. And we've got government coercion in with what we've called the owls, which are other world life forms, so they're the aliens. But there's no big battleships. There's no big Independence Day battles. It's very, very micro, so it focuses. It's basically, if you can remember the season 1 of The Walking Dead that Frank Darabont did, and how confined and how tight and grounded that show was. That's kind of the feel that we've gone with for the harvesting. So it's alien invasion and abduction, but on a worldwide scale.
Yeah.
And with the added twists and dangers. And one of the big benefits, we think, is that because it's on a worldwide scale, rights can be sold to any other country that wants to make it and tell their version of the story, as well as they've done with Bird Box, for instance.
Yeah. Wow, that's super interesting. I mean, it does remind me of The Walking Dead a lot. Like that, as you say, that first series where it was really like intense and difficult.
Yeah.
And then, wow, that sounds really interesting. So what's your plan with that, with the production and getting it for TV, if you're able to get that far?
Do you want to take that, Steve?
Well, we kind of touched on that a little bit earlier, but yeah, I mean, we've got this meeting next week, which will be interesting. I'd say we're kind of on hold for that meeting, just to kind of read the room on that. Now, they've already, this production company is a British company, and they have already indicated that they're probably not interested in the project, in buying the project. They just wanted to have a conversation with us as a general meeting to see what else we're up to. So they like the project well enough to meet with us. And so I think our next move will probably come out of that meeting.
Yeah. Really exciting.
I mean, in terms of moving forward, without that, our next objective is to publish the novel, which again,
get the book.
We're targeting early next year.
Yeah. And we've got
and then with the launch of that, using that as sort of a way to springboard into additional cold calling or approaching production companies or whomever.
Yeah.
Investors.
It is interesting. It does sound, from just the way you describe it, that it's kind of come from almost like a TV approach first, and then the idea is for a program, and then you're doing the book afterwards, and you can really feel that from the way you're describing it, which is so interesting, because haven't really seen that too much.
Well, it's not by design. it's sort of.
Well, you shouldn't say that, because it comes across well. So
does it? Oh, well, take that bit out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was all the plan all along. Yeah.
Yeah, it was. It was. Yeah, it's a very intricate plan that we've been hatching for the last 10 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. We didn't just stumble on it, I promise.
Yeah. No, it's really exciting. Yeah. So, I mean, the last thing I wanted to talk about was, we did again touch on it just a bit earlier, but with your Messflix productions, you're now helping other writers who, you might want to put into print and to get their work shown as well. So what was it that got you started with that, and where are you with that project?
Well, we're not looking for submissions. It says on the website that we're not taking submissions, but this is a guy that I met through someone else that I know who came up to me and introduced himself. A really, really nice guy called John. And he said, I've got an idea for a book. Well, every writer's heard that one, I don't know how many times. So, but, I'm a nice guy, I think. So I said, oh, okay, well, tell me about the idea that you've got for a book. And it was a really interesting premise. He has two areas of history that he loves. He loves the Second World War, and he loves the 1066 era with the Vikings and the Battle of Hastings and the French invasion and this kind of thing. And what he came up with was this young adult book. I don't know if you can hear it, but there's an ice cream van just going.
Yeah, sorry. You could just hear it, yeah.
He's
Yeah.
just back right outside my door as well. So just right outside. Anyway, getting back to it. So the premise of the book is that we've got an evacuee called Eric who gets taken from Hull and put into Riddle just outside of York. And one stormy, horrible night, he runs away from where he's been placed because it's a horrible family. And he slips and almost falls into the River Ouse. And as he's grasping at the riverbank, he gets hold of this magical axe from the Northmen that was lost in a battle there many, many hundreds of years ago. And it transports him back to the time of Harold and this kind of thing. And he has this wonderful adventure with them before he ends up coming back into his own time. And it was just a really interesting premise. And I said, well, look, send over what you've got and we'll have a read. And Steve was still over, so we both read it. And, it was okay. This is his debut novel. It's his first book. So I went back to him with a few notes after Steve and I discussed it. And he sent back his second draft. And I thought, when I very first started with Yesterday's Flight, before I sold the car to pay for Mike Garrett, I got helped a lot by a publishing company called SHN, a guy called Stephen, who was really helpful. He really mentored me a lot and made it quite easy and simple for me. And I just wanted to kind of pay it forward. And we saw promise in this story. So I've spent probably the last 4 months working on the book for him. Going back with notes and having meetings and getting together over a coffee and exploring different ways that we can use the time sequence and different ideas of how we can do things. And we've now got what is a pretty good first draft manuscript. Story's pretty tight. It's in good shape. So I'm currently going through a first round of edits on that, which I'll then send back to John, because the thing that's very tricky, and having been traditionally published myself, is what you don't want to do is take John's voice out of the story. This is his story and it's his book and it has to be in his voice, but it's going through our publishing imprint, so it's got to be of a certain standard. So it's a very fine act, very fine balance act to get correct. So when I've made the changes that I've made and I send it back to John, I need him to accept them willingly. And assuming that he does that, then it'll go to Steve for the second round, and then it'll come back to me, and I'll go through it again, and I'll send that to John for him then to sign off. So we're probably looking at a March, spring launch for the book.
Yeah.
And it's called Eric and the Axe of the Northmen, and it'll be our first external published book, and it'll be young adult, which is unusual for us because we're adult. And when I say adult, I don't mean sexy time adult, I mean grown-up adult. So yeah, and it's really exciting, and I'm really enjoying the process of seeing this new writer coming through and seeing his confidence growing, with each draft that we get.
Brilliant.
Also, the traditional publishing route is very painful these days. Let's say you want an agent. Well, getting an agent's really difficult, and it feels like a real win. But all you've really done is got somebody who said that they'll take 15% if they can sell it. You haven't really accomplished anything concrete yet. Now that agent has to then go out to publishers and find one of them to take on the book. And if they publish, they generally give you about 15% of sales. And advances are all over the map right now, including asking authors to pay advances. And so you pay to get published now instead of getting paid on an advance. That's pretty standard for mid-level houses who don't see that they're going to make their money back. Because that's one of the unfortunate aspects of publishing now, is that most books don't make money. So the way that they make money is they lose less money is by charging the author sort of a retainer fee for the publishing. And this is on print on demand, even through traditional houses now. So they're not publishing, 3,000 books and setting them in a warehouse. they're still doing it. They're doing it the Amazon way of, you order a book, they ship it off, make it, and send it to you. And so what we're doing is kind of creating a different model for writers who don't want to go through that. And writing those cover letters is painful. It takes 2 or 3 hours to write one of those, and you've got to write 50 of them. So, I mean, it's almost more work than writing the novel itself. I have 3 friends who have books that I really like, and they're sort of in the queue after this. And I've extended that offer to these people because I'm familiar with the books. I've read them. It's like, if you ever get tired of going the traditional route, we have an option for you to publish this. We can get this published for you, and you'll be on our imprint. And eventually we'll have a website and a full catalog of all the publications that we'll eventually do.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is, as Steve said. I mean, it's 3 or 4 hours work because every agent that you approach wants a different type of format. They want it double space, single space, the first 3 chapters, the first 10,000 words, however they want it doing. And very often not, you actually get ghosted. As an experiment, actually, last year, I wrote to 3 or 4 agents with Tomorrow's Flight, bearing in mind the success that it's already had, and every one of them ghosted us.
Right. Wow. Okay.
So there's a book that's had over 1 million pages read, that's been a #1 international bestseller twice, has got nearly 900 reviews on Amazon at 4.6 or whatever it is, and we couldn't even get it's a ready-made market, and we couldn't even get a response on that book. So
it's tough.
That's where it is at the moment. That's where the industry is, and that's why, as difficult as it was for us, knowing nothing about it, that's why we went the route that we went.
Yeah. Well, it's been great.
So there's hope in that message that, there is a way to do this.
There is.
It's just maybe not the traditional way.
Yeah.
Yeah. That sort of hybrid model is becoming a bit more popular now. But you're right. Sometimes people just do that initial investment up front, which is obviously outreach for some people. So it's good to see that there's other options for people who are looking at these things.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been great chatting to you. It's been absolutely fascinating, like hearing about your projects for the books and where you're going to take them. If people want to get in touch with you or to follow you around the internet, where's the best place for them to do that?
They can go through my website, martynellington.com, or through messflix.com. We're both on Twitter. It's at Stephen Stiefel and at Martyn Ellington, if they want to get in touch.
I'm
with
at
us.
Steve Stiefel.
At Steve Stiefel, yeah.
Yeah, Stephen Stiefel's another guy who I actually follow. We've had exchanges. He's a writer, so it's a little confusing.
Good God, Steve, there's not 2 of you, is there? I don't know whether there
are.
It's like that guy on Twitter called John Lewis, and every Christmas he gets loads of messages about the John Lewis advert coming out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
Pardon me. So it's at Steve Stiefel or at Martyn Ellington.
Great.
And then, as I said, the 2 websites.
We'll put links to all that stuff and also all the books in the show notes this. So, yeah, thank you very much for coming. It's been an absolutely fascinating conversation. Just before we head off, just got one more question to each of you. So, what book do you recommend everyone should be reading? We'll start with Martyn.
From our catalogue?
No, just one that you like.
Just my favourite book of all time is The Fog by James Herbert.
Right. Interesting. I don't know that one. How about you, Stephen?
I would do something a little more American highbrow. Henry James is a good choice because he seems very British, but he's American. I've written an adaptation of the Aspirin Papers, which is a terrific read if you can get past the first 10 pages. Every sentence seems to be, I dare you to stop, I dare you to stop, I dare you to stop.
Yeah.
But once you get past it, it's quite an interesting little thriller. It's about a scholar who discovers that the writer he studies died many, many years ago, that the widow is still alive and she has all of Aspirin's papers. And so he hatches a scheme to go to rent an apartment from her in Venice. She owns a big palazzo on the canals. And so he moves in with her, and tries to scheme on how to get the letters.
Right. Interesting. Well, we'll put links to all those things in the show notes.
Yeah. One quick note on the fog is that it's not the film. It's not. This is an entirely different story by James Hurd.
Right. Okay. I'll have to check it out. Well, thank you very much both for joining us, and we'll speak again soon.
Yeah, that's great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Publishing Performance podcast. I really hope you found today's episode inspiring. I love chatting to authors, writers, and people in the publishing world. Now, just before we wrap up, let me tell you about Publishing Performance, the #1 platform for authors who want to increase Amazon book sales, but I'm not really sure where to start. Now, this show is all about helping you to sell more books. And if you're looking to boost your publishing game and to maximize your book's potential on Amazon, then Publishing Performance is designed to help authors just like you to grow your readership and to reach a much wider audience. Now, I know that Amazon ads can be slightly complicated, which is why Publishing Performance is like having a personalized ad account manager to create your ad campaigns, to choose your best keywords, and to make adjustments in real time. Now, if you're investing in ads, you really want to make sure that your investment is being used effectively. And Publishing Performance does just that. It aims to make your budget go further, improve your organic rank, and target keywords more effectively. Just go to publishingperformance.com to get started with Amazon ads for just $1. Thank you so much for tuning into the Publishing Performance podcast. I really hope you found today's episode inspiring. I love chatting to authors, writers, and people in the publishing world. Now, just before we wrap up, let me tell you about Publishing Performance, the #1 platform for authors who want to increase Amazon book sales, but I'm not really sure where to start. Now, this show is all about helping you to sell more books. And if you're looking to boost your publishing game and to maximize your book's potential on Amazon, then Publishing Performance is designed to help authors just like you to grow your readership and to reach a much wider audience. Now, I know that Amazon ads can be slightly complicated, which is why Publishing Performance is like having a personalized ad account manager to create your ad campaigns, to choose your best keywords, and to make adjustments in real time. Now, if you're investing in ads, you really want to make sure that your investment is being used effectively. And Publishing Performance does just that. It aims to make your budget go further, improve your organic rank, and target keywords more effectively. Just go to publishingperformance.com to get started with Amazon ads for just $1.